Hello, my name is Jordan Cantrell, and I am the director, editor, sound designer, executive producer, and all sorts for Every Brave Man. Now, this film is interesting, I think. It's holistically a drama, and it follows the conventions almost to a T, in a way that relies heavily on acting. It revolves around social interaction, character development. It has realistic and relatable characters, but most importantly, its purpose is to portray and evoke emotions. In dramas, emotions are shown in their highest and lowest forms. It's meant to delineate reality, in a sense, which makes it so relatable and therefore highly respected as a genre. And Every Brave Man does this by showing the inside and outside of what Michael and Teresa are feeling, Michael in particular in the opening. The audience actually walks into his post-traumatic episode with him and sees just a tiny part of the atrocities that he went through. And the purpose is by the end of this film, with these kinds of episodes continue, the audience has a full story and a full picture presented that they piece together themselves. It's a journey that the character and the audience take together, which is partially what makes it so jarring and relatable. Of course, not everybody relates to war, but we all have associations with it, and it's a very heart-wrenching and passionate subject. But when viewing my opening to sample audiences, the part that got the most visceral reaction was when he hit Teresa. And I think that that's extremely important, and it shows how I succeeded by means that I created something that is extremely complex, which is what I wanted. I wanted the audience to simultaneously sympathize with Michael and be scared for him and with him. But then I also wanted that to shift towards Teresa and make people hate Michael at times. In this way, it offers a slightly different representation than is usually done regarding PTSD and war victims. It's meant to represent men in a very vulnerable state. It's meant to make audiences question what it takes to be a man and what it means to be a man. And this is where the whole social commentary and the purpose of the product becomes relevant. So in this film, in the formalist section, you hear Teresa's voice overlapping with emotions saying, pick up the gun, shoot him, don't you want to go home, they want to kill you, and so on and so forth. But she also says, it's okay. She says, you don't have a choice, you did everything you could, and things like that. And every brave man who fought in Vietnam was made to believe that if they didn't fight, that they were anti-American, that they weren't man enough, that they were disgraces, that they were weak, that this is something that no person, let alone a stereotypical man, wants to be. And Michael has no excuse. His commentary is extremely relevant today. People are terrified that the world is on the brink of another war, and men are expected to be brave and patriotic, or else they were not perceived as manly. But these men are like Michael, they're scared, and like anyone who ever did anything brave, he's absolutely terrified and ashamed in many ways, and he's hoping that if he doesn't talk about it, then no one will know. This is partially what makes it so engaging. It's not only visually and audibly jarring, but it's extremely relatable. It represents not exclusively war veterans. It represents men dealing with a mental illness in a time period where it was only perceived as a mental weakness. And through Teresa, we see the representation of the people who had to deal with their changed loved ones. Even though the film itself is so complex, technically and otherwise, it was much easier to film than I had anticipated. Since I did so much research and had such distinct choices and had such a deep understanding in what I wanted to create, it was very easy to just film spontaneously and get a successful result. We would be walking through the forest at Markham, filming the formalist parts, where we shot the episode, and I would make both of my actors drop everything and stop with what they were doing so I could film a spider on a web or a dead tree along the way, just so that I thought it would add to the sense of death and heaviness and hopelessness that I wanted part of the episode to emulate, and vice versa with the beauty and the longing for hope that it shows with Teresa walking into the water, going towards the light, going home, with the images of her and her representation of innocence that he sees. Anytime I would just see anything that reminded me of that, I would make them stop in their tracks and I would film it. And this doesn't seem like it utilizes a lot of technique, but I assure you it actually made me develop my technique, because it made me think on my feet and it forced me to be adaptable, which is something that I loved. I would see something immediately, and in the moment I would have to make a choice right then and there, how it would best be delineated on screen and how it would be the most impactful, which way to film it would best emulate that. This translated into everything I did really regarding this project. I had to trust my abilities and my knowledge, and I had to force myself to follow my instincts, which made me really grow as a filmmaker because it made me extremely receptive to representation, symbolism, and deeper meanings that come with all the choices that we have to make. And to outsiders, it seems so over the top, but as a filmmaker, you know that without that one close-up, that without that one focus pull, or without that one establishing shot, the audience is going to miss something vital. And the success of this project relied on the choices that I made, whether to go with the shots of Michael running through the combat zone or to show him kneeling like something primitive, to add to the stern voiceover before the sultry one, or vice versa. And I think that the most valuable thing that it taught me was the importance of movement within shots, particularly within the formalist elements. If I had just had staple shots providing the same content, it would have been much less interesting and much less impactful. But the movement created a flow of fluidity and an almost haunting journey. It actually seemed as if we were being taken through this, and that time and vision were being warped as Michael was experiencing this horrible situation. And it was easy to make the parts of this film, but not so easy to put together, particularly regarding to sound. I had to mute all of my realist shots, and most of my formalist shots, in fact, because there was too much non-diegetic sound in the initial takes, and there were too many things that didn't belong. So I actually used my iPhone to record most of the Foley sounds, and then I would upload them into GarageBand, into a mass file that I edited on my laptop. And it was easy to edit the Foley sounds from GarageBand and upload the files into iMovie, which is what I used to edit the film, because they were individual sounds that I could edit in iMovie without them getting too out of hand. But for the voiceovers, that entire section from the shot of Michael behind the tree stump to the very end is one huge file that I edited on GarageBand, and it is actually 7 different voice tracks, and they had different gunshots, 4 different styles of voiceovers with the different emotions to show the complexities of what Michael is feeling, in addition also to the ambiance of the scene. And going back to the gunshots, that was actually a very interesting part of the project to make, because I actually got the ambiance of the gun sounds in Markham Park. When I was filming, there's a gun range actually right next to where I was filming, and I took some voice recordings of just the ambiance, getting in the birds, the twigs, and also the gunshots in the background, but they weren't as impactful as I wanted them to be. They weren't loud enough. And so I made those sounds using a built-in sound effects on my keyboard, which is a GEM keyboard. And I was intrigued that the gunshots actually had different pitches and got carried away and actually started to play the rhythms on the keyboard with the gunshot sounds. And that's how I was inspired to turn the gunshots into a sort of pulse that was getting faster and faster as the episode intensified. The keyboard made this very easy to do. I relied heavily on my phone throughout this project, which actually proved to be a disadvantage at one point, because I was unable to get the voice recordings from my main actress onto my computer, which I had to send from my phone by email, and the files were just not transferring, they weren't downloading. And so I actually decided from that point on that I was going to use GarageBand and record all of my sounds directly from the GarageBand microphone. And since I no longer had access to my actress at that point, I did the voiceovers myself. And so I went back and I edited the footage ever so slightly so that whenever Teresa spoke, you never saw her mouth move in a discernible fashion. And I did the voice recordings myself, and then I uploaded them straight from GarageBand from iTunes into iMovie, and it was an extremely easy process from that point on, and that's how I did all of my Foley sound recordings, the rest of my voiceovers on those master tracks. And on the topic of technologies, I mentioned in my blog that I planned on using the Nik collections and other softwares to edit the film, and I actually decided against this. I thought it would be too unnecessary and too cumbersome. So I stuck with good old-fashioned iMovie, and I played around with some of the effects and decided to use the day into night effect in the episode to give it a more dark and ominous feel. And overall, I feel like the compilation of all of these choices and the experience made the film transcend what I originally thought that it was going to end up being. I didn't really have much faith in myself in the beginning, but it ended up being very organic. I feel like it harnesses emotions very well and really emulates a drama. And even though it follows the conventions of social interactions and relatable character, there is hardly any dialogue in it, and that would actually be a recurring choice throughout the film if I were to continue it, which is why it's obviously in the opening, to prepare the audience for that. The purpose of my film opening was exclusively to introduce Michael's character and to allude to the conflict, but because Michael refuses to speak as a character, there's very little to say. But there's much to see. And this can go one of two ways with the audiences. It can make them feel uncomfortable, as it's supposed to, but to a degree where they feel disconnected, or it can connect them even more to the complexities emotionally, because it's forcing them to really pay attention to his body language, to his facial expressions, and to the symbolism that's being represented on screen. But since there's a possibility that due to the lack of dialogue and the inability to watch this movie passively, it would be better off distributed in small-scale film festivals or online for free. I want people to feel like this film is approachable. And I feel like the easier it is to access the film by distributing it in relatively amateur matters, in ways that are not too in your face, in ways that makes the audience seem comfortable. Yes, I mean not putting it out in theaters since it's so unconventional in style. I want it to be something that audiences come to, not something that is pushed into audiences. This isn't exactly a mainstream type of film, and I don't think that it would succeed in a mainstream distribution method. I think that in small-scale film festivals and openly downloadable online, the audiences that choose to watch the film will be the audiences that have the ability and the knack for analyzing it in a way that will make it successful. It's more so one of those films that will be established by a small, concise, appreciating, almost, I suppose, cult following, for lack of a better term. A very small group of people that understand it and appreciate it and take it for its complexities and for its deeper meanings. It is not something that will resonate well with every audience. One, because it's so heavy, and two, because it's extremely symbolic and intellectual. It isn't something that one would watch simply for entertainment. So I am going to leave it at that. I'm extremely proud of my product. I'm extremely proud with how I developed as a filmmaker, and I was very excited to share my experiences with you through this. So I hope that this reflection also helped you to understand the film better by seeing all of my choices and my thought process. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed Every Brave Man.